My name is Rachel Wilson, and this is how I discovered my husband of 8 years had not only betrayed our marriage, but attempted to steal the life we'd built together right out from under me. The day I found them standing in my kitchen, using my favorite mug and acting like I was the intruder, something inside me changed forever. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was furious. And that fury, it saved me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. I had been away visiting my sister Olivia in Seattle for 4 days, the longest trip I'd taken without David since our honeymoon. The funny thing is, I almost canceled that trip. David had been distant lately, working late hours at his architectural firm, always on his phone texting with what he called difficult clients. Part of me wanted to stay home, to try and bridge whatever gap was growing between us. But Olivia had just had her second baby, and I hadn't seen her in months. "Go," David had insisted, kissing my forehead absently while scrolling through his phone. "I've got that Henderson project deadline anyway. I'll just be boring company." The morning I was due back, I called David from the road. No answer. I texted that I was stopping for coffee and would be home around noon. No response. It wasn't unusual these days. He was always in meetings or on calls. But something felt different this time. Heavier. Like the air before a storm. I pulled into our driveway at 12:17. Our home, a beautiful craftsman we'd purchased 3 years ago, sat under the shade of 2 massive oak trees. David and I had spent countless weekends painting, renovating, and turning it into exactly what we wanted. The garden boxes on the porch were my pride and joy, the blue front door his choice. Every inch of this place had our fingerprints on it. I noticed it immediately, a sleek silver BMW in the driveway that didn't belong to either of us. A client meeting at home, maybe? But David's meetings were always at the office or at construction sites, never here. I grabbed my overnight bag and walked up the steps to the porch. Through the window, I could see movement in the kitchen. I put my key in the lock, turned it, and stepped inside. What I saw stopped me cold. David was leaning against our kitchen island, coffee mug in hand, laughing. Across from him stood a woman I'd never seen before, tall, blonde, maybe early 30s. She was wearing a silk robe. My silk robe. The one David had given me for our anniversary last year. They both turned when the door opened. The woman's smile faded slightly, but she didn't look embarrassed. David's face, though, I'll never forget it. Not shock, not guilt, but annoyance. Like I'd interrupted something important. "Rachel," he said flatly, "you're back early." I checked my watch, still frozen in the doorway. "It's 12:20. I told you I'd be home at noon." The woman set down her coffee, in my favorite mug, the handmade ceramic one with the little birds, that my mother had given me before she passed, and extended her hand. "You must be Rachel. I'm Megan. David's told me so much about you." I didn't take her hand. I looked at David, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of this bizarre scenario unfolding in my kitchen. "Why don't you put your bag down?" David said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We should talk." I did put my bag down, but only because my arm was starting to ache from the weight. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "And why? Is she wearing my robe?" David cleared his throat. "Megan and I have been seeing each other for a while now. I was going to tell you when you got back." "Tell me what?" But I already knew. My stomach was in free fall. That we're together. That things between us, between you and me, haven't been working for a long time. I stood there trying to process what he was saying. 8 years of marriage, and he'd chosen to end it by moving another woman into our home while I was away for 4 days. "How long?" I managed to ask. "Does it matter?" David sighed, like my question was unreasonable. 7 months, Megan offered, as if she was being helpful. We met at the Henderson project, actually. I'm the interior designer. 7 months. While I'd been working extra shifts at Hillside Coffee to help pay for our upcoming vacation to Portugal, a second honeymoon we'd been planning for over a year, he'd been building a relationship with someone else. You need to leave, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Both of you. Megan looked at David, then back at me. Actually, Rachel, David and I have discussed this, and we think it would be best if you stayed with a friend for a while, just until you find a new place. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of what she was suggesting, that I should leave my own home so my husband and his girlfriend could live in it, was beyond comprehension. This is my house, I said. I'm not going anywhere. David finally set down his coffee and crossed his arms. The gesture was so familiar. It was what he did when he was preparing to be stubborn about something, like which restaurant to choose or what movie to watch. But this wasn't a minor disagreement about dinner plans. Rachel, be reasonable. The house is in my name. I make the mortgage payments. I've been the primary breadwinner since we bought it. We're married, David. Half of everything is mine. Actually, Megan interjected, Oregon isn't a community property state. Assets remain with the title holder unless otherwise specified. I stared at her. Are you a lawyer now? My ex-husband is, she said with a small, smug smile. I picked up a few things during the divorce. David took a step toward me, his voice softening in that patronizing way he used when he thought I was being irrational. Look, we've already moved some of your things to the guest room for now. Take some time to pack what you want to keep, and I'll help you find a new place. I'll be fair about this. I looked past him and noticed for the first time that the living room had changed. My books had been removed from the shelves. The throw pillows I'd picked out were gone, replaced by sleek, modern ones in colors I hated. My grandmother's quilt was nowhere to be seen. Where are my things? I asked, my voice rising. In storage, Megan answered. We needed to make room. Don't worry, it's all safe. You moved my belongings without my permission, while I was gone for 4 days? David had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. We're trying to make this transition as smooth as possible, Rachel. Megan's lease is up, and it just makes sense for her to move in here. Makes sense? My voice was shaking now. It makes sense to move your girlfriend into our marital home before even telling me our marriage is over? I tried to tell you, David said, frustration creeping into his tone. But you never want to have difficult conversations. You always avoid anything unpleasant. This was gaslighting at its finest. I'd begged him to go to counseling 6 months ago when I sensed something was wrong. He'd refused, saying we were just going through a rough patch and would be fine. I want you both out of my house, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Now, or I'm calling the police. Megan laughed, actually laughed, and looked at David. She can't do that. Tell her. David ran a hand through his hair, another familiar gesture, one that used to make my heart flutter. Now it made me feel sick. Rachel, don't make this uglier than it needs to be. The deed is in my name. I've documented that I've paid 83% of the mortgage over the past 3 years. My salary is what qualified us for the loan in the first place. You have no legal right to force me out. We're taking over now, Megan added, with a note of finality. David and I are starting fresh, and you need to accept that. I looked around at the home I'd poured my heart into, the kitchen where I'd taught myself to bake bread during the pandemic, the living room where we'd hosted Christmas for both our families last year, the garden I'd planted and nurtured until it bloomed with color every spring. You planned this, I said, the realization dawning on me. You waited until I was gone to do this. It seemed kinder, David said, to have everything settled when you got back. Kinder, I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a cold, clear anger that sharpened my thoughts. "Fine," I said, watching, surprise flicker across both their faces. "I'll go pack a bag." I walked past them, up the stairs to our bedroom, a room that no longer felt like mine. The bed had new sheets. Megan's clothes hung in the closet next to David's. My side of the bathroom counter had been cleared of my things, replaced by expensive-looking skincare products I didn't recognize. I grabbed a suitcase from the hall closet and threw in whatever clothes of mine I could find. Most were gone. To storage, apparently. I found my jewelry box shoved in the back of a drawer and checked inside. At least my grandmother's pearls were still there, along with the sapphire earrings David had given me on our 5th anniversary. As I packed, my mind was racing. This couldn't be legal. Married couples didn't just get to decide unilaterally who kept the house, did they? But I didn't know for sure. My name wasn't on the deed. We'd used David's credit because mine had been damaged by student loans, and he'd qualified for a better interest rate on his own. I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done the moment I walked in. I called Jessica Martinez. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica wasn't just my best friend. She was also a paralegal at Ocean View Law Offices. If anyone would know what my rights were, it would be her. "Hey, Rach, how was Seattle?" she answered cheerfully. "Jess," I said, my voice breaking, "I need help." I briefly explained the situation, keeping my voice low so David and Megan wouldn't hear. "Don't leave," Jessica said immediately. "Do not leave that house, Rachel. If you walk out voluntarily, it could hurt your claim in the divorce." "But David says—" "I don't care what David says. Listen to me. Oregon might not be a community, property state, but it is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets get divided fairly, not necessarily equally. The house is a marital asset, regardless of whose name is on the deed. And if he moved another woman in without your knowledge or consent, a judge is not going to look kindly on that." "What do?" I asked, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time since I'd walked through the door. "Stay put. Take pictures. Of everything. Her clothes in your closet, any changes they've made, everything. And don't sign anything. I'm calling Mark Thompson right now. He's the best divorce attorney at our firm. I can't afford— He owes me a favor. Just don't leave, Rachel, promise me." "I promise," I said, feeling strength returning to my voice. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Jessica said, and hung up. I finished packing the suitcase, not because I was leaving, but because I wanted to appear cooperative for now. I took pictures of everything: the changed bedroom, Megan's clothes, the altered living room, even the coffee mugs they'd been drinking from when I arrived. Then I went back downstairs, suitcase in hand. David and Megan were sitting at the kitchen island, heads close together, whispering. They looked up when they saw me, relief evident on both their faces. "I've called a lawyer," I said calmly. "He's on his way over now. I'm not leaving this house, David. Not today, not tomorrow, not until a court tells me I have to." The smug expression slid off Megan's face. David stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Rachel. You can't afford a lawyer." "Actually, I can. And according to her, I have every right to stay in my marital home, regardless of whose name is on the deed." "This is ridiculous," Megan said, standing as well. "We were trying to be reasonable." "Reasonable would have been telling me to my face that our marriage was over. Reasonable would have been not moving your girlfriend into our home while I was away for 4 days." "Reasonable," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word, "would have been respecting the 8 years we spent building a life together. David." David's face darkened. I recognized the expression. It was the one he wore when someone challenged his authority at work. If that's how you want to play this, fine. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. I set down my suitcase. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time since I'd walked into my changed home, I felt like I might actually be able to fight for what was mine. When Jessica arrived 30 minutes later, she wasn't alone. Mark Thompson, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, accompanied her. David and Megan had retreated to the backyard patio, shooting dark looks through the glass doors as my reinforcements arrived. "Where are they?" Mark asked after brief introductions. "Outside," I said, gesturing to the patio. "They've been out there since I told them I wasn't leaving." Mark nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, Jessica filled me in on the basics, but I need you to start from the beginning. When did you learn about the affair?" "About an hour ago," I said, still barely able to believe it myself. "I just got back from visiting my sister, and they were here, acting like they owned the place." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "He moved another woman into your marital home without your knowledge or consent, while you were away for a brief family visit." When he put it like that, the audacity of what David had done seemed even more staggering. "Yes. And they've moved my things to storage, changed the decor. They had the nerve to suggest I should find somewhere else to live." Mark's expression hardened. "Mrs. Wilson, I want you to know that what your husband has done here is not just morally reprehensible, it's legally questionable. Oregon courts take a dim view of spouses who attempt to force their partners out of the marital home, especially through deceptive means." For the first time since walking through my front door, I felt something like hope. "So I can stay?" "Not only can you stay, I strongly advise that you do. Abandonment of the marital home can complicate property division later." I glanced toward the patio where David was pacing, phone to his ear, probably calling his own lawyer. "What about her?" I asked, nodding toward Megan. "Can I make her leave?" Mark considered this. "That's trickier. Your husband has the same right to occupy the marital home as you do, and as the title holder, he could technically invite guests. But," he added, seeing my face fall, "we can petition the court for exclusive use of the marital home pending divorce proceedings, especially given the circumstances." Jessica, who had been taking notes, looked up. "What Rachel needs right now is leverage, right? Something to make David reconsider this whole situation?" Mark smiled slightly. "Precisely, and I believe we have it. Mrs. Wilson, would you be willing to show me around the house? I'd like to document the current state of things." I gave them a tour, pointing out all the changes that had been made in my absence. Mark took pictures with his phone, occasionally asking questions about when we'd purchased various items or who had paid for what. When we reached the office, a small room off the main hallway, Mark paused. "Does your husband keep important documents in here?" "Yes," I said, "in the filing cabinet and on his computer. With your permission, I'd like to take a look at any financial records, property documents, anything related to your joint assets." I hesitated only briefly. The David I thought I knew, the man I'd trusted with my heart and future, was gone. In his place was someone calculating and cruel, who had planned this ambush down to the last detail. "Go ahead," I said. Mark spent the next 20 minutes going through the filing cabinet while Jessica continued to document the house. I sat at the desk, feeling strangely detached, as if this were happening to someone else. "Mrs. Wilson," Mark said suddenly, his voice sharp with interest, "when did you and your husband refinance the mortgage?" I looked up, confused. "We didn't." He held up a document. "According to this, the mortgage was refinanced last month. And look at this." He pointed to a line on the paper. I leaned forward, scanning the document, and there it was, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature at all. It was close, but the R in Rachel was all wrong, and I never looped my L's that way. "I didn't sign this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's not my signature." Mark and Jessica exchanged a significant look. "Are you certain?" Mark asked. "Absolutely certain. I would remember refinancing our mortgage, and that's not how I sign my name." Mark carefully placed the document in his briefcase. "Mrs. Wilson, if what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, then this could constitute mortgage fraud. That's a serious offense." I felt sick. David forged my signature? Why would he do that? We'd need to investigate further, but my guess would be to extract equity from the home, possibly to finance whatever he's planning next. The important thing is, this gives us considerable leverage. Just then, we heard the sliding glass door open and footsteps approaching the office. David appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "You can't just go through my private files." Mark stood, his demeanor calm but authoritative. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Mark Thompson, representing your wife in your upcoming divorce proceedings. I should inform you that we've discovered some concerning documentation that suggests potential mortgage fraud." The color drained from David's face. "You have no right. Actually, as your wife and co-owner of marital assets, Mrs. Wilson has every right to access financial documents pertaining to those assets. Now, I suggest we all sit down and discuss how we're going to proceed. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to involve the authorities regarding the apparently forged refinancing documents." David's eyes darted to me, then back to Mark. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely afraid. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right call. I spent that first night on the living room couch, refusing to leave despite David and Megan's obvious displeasure. They retreated to the master bedroom, my bedroom, whispering angrily behind closed doors. I barely slept, my mind racing between shock, grief, and moments of crystalline clarity. By morning, I had moved beyond the initial paralysis of betrayal and was ready to fight. The house was quiet when I woke up. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that David and Megan had gone to work. "We should discuss arrangements when we get back," David had written, as if we were negotiating a minor schedule conflict rather than the implosion of our marriage and home. I called in sick to Hillside Coffee where I worked as the assistant manager. Nancy, my boss, didn't question it. She'd known me long enough to hear the strain in my voice. "Take all the time you need, Rachel," she said. "Your shifts are covered." With the house to myself, I began a methodical investigation. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. First, I went back to the office where Mark had discovered the refinancing documents. I wasn't a financial expert, but even I could see something was off. According to the paperwork, David had pulled $175,000 in equity out of our home, money that was nowhere to be found in our joint accounts. I took photos of everything, sending them directly to Mark and Jessica. Next, I checked our joint checking account online. The balance was substantially lower than it should have been. Going through recent transactions, I discovered David had been systematically moving money to a separate account for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as recently as last week. By my calculation, he'd diverted nearly $30,000. My hands shook as I forwarded the account statements to Mark. This wasn't just a man leaving his wife for another woman. This was calculated financial sabotage. I wandered through the house, really looking at what had changed. In the 4 days I'd been gone, Megan had made significant inroads into erasing me from my own home. My clothes had been consolidated to a fraction of the closet space. The refrigerator had been cleaned out of my almond milk and the special jam I ordered from a local farm. Even the photos had been curated. Any picture featuring just me was gone, and our wedding portrait had vanished from its place of honor in the hallway. In its place hung a modern abstract painting I'd never seen before. I lifted it carefully from the wall, curious if they'd actually thrown away our wedding photo. Behind the new art, I found a small rectangular depression in the wallpaper, the exact size of the missing frame. On a hunch, I headed to the attic. David rarely went up there because of his mild dust allergy. I climbed the pull-down ladder and switched on the single bare bulb that illuminated the space. There, stacked neatly in the corner, were boxes labeled Rachel. They had indeed packed away my life, my books, photos, even the quilt my grandmother had made me. But what caught my eye was something unexpected. A cardboard file box labeled House Documents, Original Copies. My heart raced as I pulled it toward me, sneezing in the dusty air. Inside were folders organized by year, each containing paperwork related to our home, purchase agreements, the original mortgage, insurance policies, renovation permits. And there, in the folder marked Purchase, was something that made me gasp. The original deed to our house, with both our names on it. I stared at the document, uncomprehending at first. David had insisted that the house was solely in his name, that his credit alone had secured the mortgage. But the paper in my trembling hands told a different story. We were joint tenants with rights of survivorship. The house was legally half mine. I snapped photos of the deed from multiple angles, making sure the date and both signatures were clearly visible. Then I texted Jessica. Found original deed in attic, both names on it. Call me ASAP. She responded immediately. Holy shit. This changes everything. Don't tell David you found it. Mark wants to meet. I carefully returned everything to its place, making sure the boxes looked undisturbed. As I climbed down from the attic, my phone rang. It was Chris Parker, David's friend from college. Rachel, he said, his voice unusually hesitant. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I can't stop thinking about what David's doing. It's not right. I sank onto the hallway bench, suddenly exhausted. You know about Megan? Everyone knows, he admitted. They've been together since that conference in Denver last fall. I told him he needed to come clean months ago, but he kept saying he was waiting for the right time. 7 months. While I'd been working overtime and planning our future, my husband had been creating an exit strategy. Why are you telling me this now, Chris? I asked, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Chris had been at our wedding. He'd given a toast about lifelong commitment. There was a long pause. Because of what he's planning to do with the house, he finally said. He told us, me and Mike, that he was going to renovate and flip it, that he'd found a way to get you to sign off on the refinancing without you understanding what it meant. He made it sound like a joke, like he was pulling one over on you. My free hand curled into a fist. And what did you say when he shared this hilarious plan? I told him it was wrong, Chris said quietly. That's when he stopped talking to me about it. Rachel, I'm sorry. I should have warned you sooner. I thought about all the paperwork I'd signed in recent months. David was always handling our finances, presenting me with forms that needed my signature for tax purposes or insurance updates. Had I unknowingly signed documents related to the refinancing? But then, why would he need to forge my signature on the final paperwork? The refinancing document has my signature on it, I said, but I never signed it. Chris was silent for a moment. That doesn't surprise me. Megan's friend Andrea works at the bank. She's a notary. The pieces clicked into place. With a friendly notary willing to look the other way, David could have easily submitted forged documents. My signature on the refinancing papers wasn't just inaccurate, it was fraudulent. I need to go, I said suddenly. Thank you for calling, Chris. Rachel, he said before I could hang up. Be careful. David's. He's not the guy we thought he was. After ending the call, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing the layers of betrayal. David hadn't just fallen for someone else. He'd orchestrated a complex plan to claim our home and a substantial portion of our assets, all while keeping me in the dark. I forwarded the photos of the deed to Mark, along with Chris's information, in case a witness became necessary. Then I made another decision. I needed allies in this neighborhood, people who might notice if things escalated. My first stop was next door, where Eleanor Johnson had lived for 40 years. Mrs. Johnson was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and missed nothing that happened on our street. She answered the door in her gardening apron, secateurs in hand. "Rachel, dear, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in." Her cozy living room smelled of cinnamon and old books. I declined her offer of tea, unsure how to begin. "Mrs. Johnson," I said finally, "I'm having some marriage problems. David has moved another woman into our house." Her expression didn't change. "I know, dear. The blonde in the BMW. Arrived with quite a lot of luggage yesterday. I thought perhaps she was a relative." "She's not," I said, grimly. "She's the woman David has been seeing behind my back. They're trying to force me out of my own home." Mrs. Johnson set down her secateurs with deliberate care. "Are they now?" The steel in her voice reminded me that this gentle-looking lady had been a corporate attorney before retirement. "I'm not leaving," I assured her. "But I wanted you to know what's happening. If you see anything unusual, or if it seems like there's trouble." "I understand completely," she said, patting my hand. "I'll keep an eye out. And Rachel? My late husband was a locksmith. I still have his tools and quite a good memory for how to use them. If you need any locks changed, you just let me know." I left Mrs. Johnson's house feeling marginally better. Having an ally next door, one who wouldn't hesitate to call the police if necessary, was reassuring. My next stop was across the street, where Sam Cooper was working on her garden. Sam and her wife had moved to the neighborhood around the same time as David and me, and we'd become casual friends, often sharing garden cuttings and recipes. Sam looked up as I approached, pushing her sun hat back. "Hey, Rachel, how is your sister's?" "Olivia's fine," I said, then hesitated. "Sam, I need to tell you something, and it's complicated." By the time I finished explaining, Sam was visibly angry. "That absolute bastard," she spat. "And he moved her in? While you were gone? Who does that?" "Apparently my husband," I said, attempting a wry smile. "What can I do?" she asked immediately. "You need a place to stay? Because our guest room is yours as long as you need it." The offer touched me deeply. "Thank you, but I'm staying put. My name is on the deed. But if you and Kate could just be aware, keep an eye out. I don't think David would ever get physical, but—" "Say no more," Sam said firmly. "Kate and I will be on alert. And Rachel, document everything. Every conversation, every interaction. You never know what might be important later." It was solid advice. When I returned home, I started a detailed log and a password-protected document on my laptop, beginning with my return home the previous day and including my conversations with Mrs. Johnson and Sam. I was finishing up when my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mark can meet at his office at 4, bringing a forensic accountant colleague. This is big." I glanced at my watch. Just after 2 p.m. I had time to shower and change before heading to Ocean View Law offices. As I stood under the hot water, I felt some of the tension leave my body. For the first time since walking in on David and Megan, I felt like I might have the upper hand. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal pencil skirt and ivory blouse I'd worn to job interviews, understated pearl earrings, and my most comfortable heels. War paint, of sorts. Looking put together helped me feel put together, and I needed every advantage. As I was about to leave, I hesitated by the master bedroom door. I hadn't been inside since yesterday's initial shock. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The transformation was jarring. Megan's influence was everywhere, from the new bedding to the reorganized dresser tops. My side of the closet had been reduced to a few items, while her clothes dominated the space. On what had been my nightstand, all traces of me were gone, replaced by her phone charger, a stack of design magazines, and a framed photo of her and David at what looked like a restaurant opening. I picked up the photo, studying it. They were dressed formally, champagne flutes in hand, beaming at the camera. David's arm was around her waist in a gesture of easy intimacy that made my stomach clench. According to the subtle date stamp in the corner, the picture had been taken 4 months ago, while David and I were still planning our summer vacation and discussing whether we were ready to start trying for a baby. I set the photo down carefully, resisting the urge to smash it against the wall. Instead, I opened David's sock drawer, where he always kept emergency cash. As expected, the envelope was there, but when I opened it, I found only $20 instead of the usual few $100s. I checked his other hiding spots, the hollowed-out book on his nightstand, the compartment in his watch case. All empty. He was preparing for war, too. I took one last look around the changed bedroom, then grabbed my purse and headed for the front door. As I was locking up, I noticed a car slowing in front of our house. Megan's silver BMW. She must have forgotten something. I straightened my shoulders and walked to my car, forcing myself to move unhurriedly. Megan rolled down her window as I reached the driveway. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her tone falsely pleasant. "I have an appointment," I replied, equally pleasant. "Don't wait up." Her smile tightened. "David mentioned that you're being difficult about moving out. I hope you realize this is only making things harder for everyone." I tilted my head, considering her. This woman who had helped my husband plan the systematic dismantling of our marriage while smiling to my face at his office parties and project openings. Who had moved into my home while I was away, touching my things, sleeping in my bed. "Megan," I said calmly, "I understand that you think you've won, that you and David have this all figured out, but let me be very clear, you have no idea what's coming." Her composure slipped, just for a second. "Is that a threat?" "Not at all," I said, opening my car door. "It's a promise. Enjoy your afternoon." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her in my rearview mirror, phone already to her ear, calling David, no doubt. Good. Let them worry. Ocean View law offices occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek building overlooking the harbor. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where Mark, Jessica, and a woman I didn't recognize were waiting. Mark rose to greet me, his expression serious but confident. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for coming in. This is Diane Matthews, a forensic accountant who consults with our firm." Diane, a striking woman in her 40s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to her head, shook my hand firmly. "Ms. Matthews, please, I've been reviewing the financial documents you forwarded. You've been very thorough." We settled around the conference table, which was covered with printouts of the materials I'd sent, bank statements, the refinancing documents, photos of the original deed. "Before we begin," Mark said, "I want to confirm something. You had no knowledge of your husband removing $175,000 in equity from your home?" "Absolutely none," I said firmly. "And I never signed that refinancing document." Mark nodded. "And you discovered the original deed today, showing joint ownership of the property?" "Yes. It was in the attic, in a box of original house documents. Yet your husband claimed the house was solely in his name and that he'd made most of the payments." "He did. And until today, I believed him. David always handled our finances." I felt a flush of embarrassment. I trusted him. Diane spoke up. "That's not uncommon in marriages, Ms. Wilson. One partner often takes the lead on financial matters. The problem arises when that trust is abused." Mark spread out several documents. "Based on what we've gathered, your husband has engaged in several potentially illegal activities. First, the forged refinancing document. Second, the systematic diversion of marital assets to hidden accounts. Third, misrepresentation of property ownership with intent to deprive you of your legal share. What does this mean? I asked, trying to absorb it all. It means, Jessica said, leaning forward, that David is in serious trouble. Mark nodded. We have several options. We could file for divorce immediately, citing fraud and financial misconduct. We could pursue criminal charges related to the forgery. Or, he paused, we could use this information as leverage to negotiate a settlement that's very favorable to you. I want my house, I said immediately. And I want him to pay for what he's done. That's certainly achievable, Diane said. Based on my preliminary analysis, your husband has diverted approximately $215,000 in joint assets over the past 7 months, including the home equity and funds from your shared accounts. The figure stunned me into silence. David and I weren't wealthy. We lived comfortably on our combined incomes, but $215,000 represented years of savings and hard work. Where did it all go? I finally managed to ask. Diane consulted her notes. Some went to a new account in his name only. Some appears to have been spent on travel, restaurants, gifts, presumably for his girlfriend, and a substantial amount, about $50,000, was transferred to an LLC registered 2 months ago. Horizon Projects, LLC. I've never heard of it, I said. It was registered by David Wilson and Megan Taylor as equal partners, Diane explained. According to their business filing, they plan to acquire, renovate, and resell residential properties. The pieces clicked into horrible place. They were going to flip our house, I said numbly. Use our home as their first project. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. The good news is we caught this before they could do real damage. The refinancing can potentially be contested due to the forged signature. The diverted funds can be traced and recovered in the divorce settlement. Mark cleared his throat. Mrs. Wilson, I'd like to suggest a strategy. Rather than immediately filing for divorce, we prepare all the necessary documentation, but hold off on submitting it. Instead, we request a meeting with your husband and his attorney, assuming he's obtained one, to discuss an amicable resolution. What's amicable about any of this? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Nothing, Mark acknowledged. But the meeting gives us an opportunity to present our evidence and make it clear that pursuing this in court will not end well for him. It gives him a chance to settle privately without risking criminal charges or public embarrassment. And if he refuses, then we file everything, the divorce petition, a request for a forensic audit of all accounts, and a police report regarding the forged documents. We go nuclear. I considered this. Part of me wanted to go nuclear immediately, to watch David face the consequences of his actions in the most public, damaging way possible. But another part, the practical part, recognized that a negotiated settlement might be faster and less emotionally draining. How soon can we have this meeting? I asked. I can have my assistant reach out tomorrow, Mark said. Aim for the day after. In the meantime, I recommend you continue documenting everything and avoid confrontations with either your husband or Ms. Taylor. What about tonight? I asked. They're expecting me to move out. Mark's expression hardened. Under no circumstances should you leave that house. If they press the issue, remind them that you're a legal owner of the property and have every right to remain. If the situation becomes uncomfortable, you can retreat to a specific room, but do not leave the premises. Jessica added, and if things get heated, call me. I'll come over and play buffer. The meeting concluded with a review of next steps. I would gather any additional financial documents I could access. Mark would prepare for the settlement meeting. Diane would continue tracing the diverted funds. And I would return home to what promised to be an uncomfortable evening. As I drove back to the house, I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication at discovering David's deception, anticipation of the confrontation to come, and a deep, aching sadness for what had been lost. Not just my marriage, but my belief in the man I had loved for 8 years. The sun was setting as I pulled into our driveway, casting long shadows across the front yard. David's car was there, parked beside Megan's BMW. They were home, waiting for me to return with my tail between my legs, ready to accept defeat and walk away from everything we'd built together. They had no idea what was coming. I squared my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked up the path to my front door, key in hand. Whatever happened inside, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going anywhere. I put my key in the lock, turned it, and stepped into what felt like hostile territory. The living room lights were on, and I could hear voices from the kitchen, David and Megan, discussing dinner plans as if this were their home and had been for years. As if I were the intruder. I set my purse down deliberately, making enough noise that they would know I had returned. The conversation in the kitchen stopped abruptly. After a moment, David appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "You're back," he said flatly. "I live here," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Where else would I go?" Megan appeared behind him, wineglass in hand. "We thought you were staying with a friend tonight." "I never said that." David sighed, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture that once made my heart flutter. Now it just reminded me of his dishonesty. "Rachel, be reasonable. This situation is uncomfortable for everyone. Wouldn't it be easier if you stayed somewhere else while we sort things out?" "Easier for whom?" I asked, moving past them into the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator, surveying its changed contents, unfamiliar brands, foods I never bought. I selected a bottle of water and turned to face them. "This is my home. I'm not leaving." David's carefully maintained composure slipped. "For God's sake, Rachel, what's the point of making this difficult? It's over between us. I've moved on. The mature thing would be to accept that and make a clean break." I took a slow sip of water, letting his words hang in the air. "I had an interesting meeting with my lawyer today. A flicker of something, uncertainty. Concern?" crossed David's face. "You hired a lawyer?" "Mark Thompson. Perhaps you've heard of him? He specializes in high-conflict divorces involving financial misconduct." David paled slightly. Megan looked between us, her brow furrowed. "What are you implying?" David asked, his voice stiff. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Mark is very interested in the refinancing documents you submitted last month, particularly my signature on them." I paused, watching his reaction carefully. "The forged signature." David's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Then perhaps you can explain why $175,000 in equity was pulled from our home without my knowledge, or where the money went, or why you've been systematically moving funds to an account I don't have access to." I set my water bottle down with deliberate calm. "Or maybe you'd like to explain Horizon Projects, LLC." The mention of the LLC visibly startled both of them. Megan set her wineglass down so hard that red liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the white countertop. "You've been spying on us," she accused. "No, Megan. I've been investigating financial fraud committed against me by my husband. There's a difference." I turned back to David. "The meeting with your attorney is scheduled for the day after tomorrow, 2 o'clock at Ocean View Law Offices." "I don't have an attorney," David said, a note of panic creeping into his voice. "Then I suggest you get one. Quickly." I picked up my water and moved toward the stairs. "I'll be using the guest room tonight." "Rachel, wait," David called, following me. "Let's talk about this." I paused, hand on the banister. "We're past talking, David. Way past. You've spent 7 months lying to my face, stealing our joint assets, and planning to take our home. Now you're facing the consequences. You're blowing this out of proportion, he insisted, lowering his voice so Megan wouldn't hear. Yes. I should have told you about Megan sooner. And yes, I've been setting aside some money for our separation. But that's normal in a divorce. Normal? I laughed incredulously. You forged my signature to refinance our home. You and your girlfriend created an LLC with the apparent intention of flipping the house out from under me. You moved her in while I was visiting my sister. None of that is normal, David. It's calculating and cruel. His expression hardened. And now you're threatening me with lawyers. Classy. No, I'm protecting myself, I corrected him. Something I should have done sooner, apparently. As I continued up the stairs, David called after me. You know this will get ugly if you push it. I have resources you don't. I turned, looking down at him from the landing. You mean the money you stole from our joint accounts? The equity? You illegally extracted from our home? Those resources? For once, David had no ready response. I continued to the guest room, closed the door firmly behind me, and allowed myself, finally, a moment of triumph. The look on his face when I mentioned the LLC had been worth every second of this horrible day. But my victory was short-lived. 20 minutes later, as I was unpacking the few belongings I'd managed to gather from around the house, my phone pinged with a text from my sister. Rachel, what's going on? David just called Olivia's husband, Josh, saying you're having some kind of breakdown, said you're making wild accusations and refusing to leave the house. Are you okay? I stared at the message, a fresh wave of anger washing over me. Of course, David would start damage control by spinning the narrative, make me sound unhinged, unreasonable. I called Olivia immediately. I'm fine, I said when she answered. Better than fine, actually. David's panicking because I caught him. Caught him doing what? Josh said David sounded really worried about you. I explained everything. The affair, the moved-in girlfriend, the financial deception, my meeting with the lawyer. By the time I finished, Olivia was speechless. That absolute monster, she finally managed. I'm coming over. No, don't, I said quickly. That's exactly what he wants, to make this seem like a situation so dire that my family needs to intervene. I have this under control, Liv. Are you sure? Because I can be there by morning. I'm sure. The meeting with the attorneys is day after tomorrow. Can you do me a favor? Call Mom and Dad before David does. Tell them what's really happening. Of course. And Rachel, I'm so sorry. After hanging up, I sent a quick text to Jessica, updating her on the confrontation with David. She responded immediately. He's panicking. Good. Sleep with your door locked tonight. It was solid advice. I checked that the guest room door could indeed be locked from the inside, then changed into pajamas and tried to settle in for what promised to be a restless night. Sleep eluded me. I could hear David and Megan moving around. Downstairs, the murmur of tense conversation, the occasional raised voice, the sound of a phone call being made. I resisted the urge to go downstairs and eavesdrop. Whatever they were planning, I would find out soon enough. Around midnight, I received an email notification that chilled me. David had canceled our joint credit card, the card I'd used for years, the one linked to my Amazon account, my monthly subscriptions, my auto payments for car insurance. With a few clicks, he'd cut off another piece of my financial life. I forwarded the cancellation notice to Mark and added it to my growing documentation file. Then I opened my banking app to check our joint checking account, the one that held my direct deposits from Hillside Coffee. The balance showed 0. My hands shook with anger as I typed a message to Mark. He's emptied our joint checking account. All my earnings from the coffee shop were deposited there. Mark's response came quickly, despite the late hour. Document everything. We'll add it to the list for the meeting. Do you have access to any other funds? I did. Barely. A personal savings account I'd opened after my mother had insisted every woman should have her own money, just in case. I'd been depositing small amounts from each paycheck for years, building what I'd thought of as a vacation fund. Now it would be my survival fund. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I made lists, accounts to check, subscriptions to cancel, and reestablish bills coming due that I needed to address. I was essentially starting from financial scratch at 34, with a husband who seemed determined to leave me with nothing. When morning came, I was exhausted, but resolute. I waited until I heard both David and Megan leave for work, then ventured downstairs. The kitchen was immaculate, cleaner than I'd ever seen it during my marriage. Megan's influence, no doubt. I made coffee and checked my phone. Olivia had texted to confirm she'd spoken with our parents. "They're furious on your behalf," she wrote. "Dad wants to drive down there and have a word with David, but I talked him out of it." That made me smile, imagining my mild-mannered father confronting David. He'd probably just lecture him about honesty and responsibility, but the thought was comforting nonetheless. With the house to myself, I continued my inventory. I went through every room, photographing the changes, noting what was missing or altered. In the master bathroom, I discovered all my expensive skincare products had been replaced by Megan's even more expensive ones. My favorite perfume, a gift from David on our 5th anniversary, was gone. In our bedroom closet, I found a memory box I'd kept throughout our marriage. It contained movie ticket stubs, dried flowers from special occasions, handwritten notes David had left me over the years. The box was still there, but when I opened it, I discovered it had been emptied. Every physical reminder of our happy moments, gone. That hurt more than the financial manipulation. David hadn't just moved on. He was actively erasing our history together. I put the empty box back and continued my survey. In David's home office, I found a stack of mail that had been delivered during my absence. Bills, mostly, but also a thick envelope from a bank I didn't recognize. It had been opened, but the contents were missing. I noted it in my documentation file, then checked my personal email. There was a message from Mark's office confirming tomorrow's meeting and asking me to arrive 30 minutes early to review strategy. Another from my boss at Hillside Coffee checking in, and a third from an email address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, "You should know." I hesitated before opening it. Anonymous emails rarely brought good news, but my curiosity won out. "Rachel," it began, "you don't know me, but I work with Megan at Taylor Design Group. What David and Megan are doing to you is wrong. You should know they've been planning this for months. Megan has been bragging about how they're going to renovate their house once you're gone. She even has mood boards and material samples picked out. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I thought you deserved to know how calculated this whole thing has been. A concerned observer." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold beside me. This unknown ally had just provided another piece of evidence confirming the premeditation behind David and Megan's actions. I forwarded the email to Mark, then replied to the sender, "Thank you for your honesty. If you have any other information that might help me, I would be grateful." Within minutes, a response arrived. "I'll keep my eyes open. Megan keeps a folder of house plans on her desk. She calls it the Takeover Project. Not subtle, but she thinks it's funny." My jaw clenched. The Takeover Project. They had made a game of destroying my life. I replied again. "If you can send any photos or documents from that folder, it would help my case enormously." "I'll see what I can do," came the response. "Be careful, Rachel. Megan isn't as nice as she pretends to be." A chill ran through me. I had been focusing so much on David's betrayal that I hadn't fully considered Megan's role in all of this. She wasn't just the other woman. She was an active participant in the scheme to push me out of my home and life. I spent the rest of the morning updating my documentation and preparing for tomorrow's meeting. Around noon, my phone rang. An unknown. Hello. Mrs. Wilson, this is Andrea Briggs from First National Bank. The name rang a bell. Chris had mentioned an Andrea who worked at a bank and was friends with Megan. I'm calling about some concerns with recent transactions on your joint account with David Wilson. I sat up straighter. What concerns? There was a large withdrawal yesterday evening that triggered our fraud prevention system. $4,500, essentially, emptying the account. It was conducted in person by Mr. Wilson, but given the unusual nature of the transaction, we're required to verify with all account holders. The amount stunned me. That was far more than should have been in our joint checking account. When did this money enter the account? There was a deposit of $40,000 2 days ago, transferred from an equity line of credit. More of the refinancing money, I realized. David was moving it around, trying to secure it before I could track it down. Mrs. Wilson, can you confirm whether this withdrawal was authorized by you? It absolutely was not, I said firmly. In fact, I'd like to report it as a disputed transaction. My husband and I are in the process of separating, and he did not have my permission to empty our joint account. There was a pause. I see. In that case, I'll need to file a report. This may lead to a temporary freeze on the account while we investigate. That's fine, I said, thinking quickly. And Ms. Briggs, I believe you're friends with Megan Taylor. Is that correct? Another pause, longer this time. I know Ms. Taylor professionally, yes. Then you should be aware that my attorney is investigating potential bank fraud related to a recent refinancing of my home. A refinancing that appears to have involved a forged signature and a notary who may have facilitated it. I kept my voice pleasant but firm. Just something to keep in mind. Mrs. Wilson, I assure you, I take my professional responsibilities very seriously. I'm sure you do, which is why I wanted to make sure you understood the full context of the situation. My lawyer will be contacting your bank formally tomorrow. After ending the call, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had no idea if Andrea had been involved in the forged documents, but her reaction, defensive, nervous, suggested she knew more than she was letting on. I forwarded Mark the details of the call and the additional withdrawal. Then I checked. The time just after 1 p.m. David would typically be in meetings all afternoon, but I decided to text him anyway. Just got a call from the bank about your $42,500 withdrawal. I've disputed the transaction as unauthorized. The account is now frozen pending investigation. His response came almost immediately. You're making a huge mistake. No, David. You made the huge mistake. Several, actually. Starting with underestimating me. I set my phone down, half expecting it to ring with an angry call from him. Instead, a few minutes later, I received an email notification. David had shared a Google document with me titled Settlement Proposal. I opened it, curious. The document was brief and to the point. If I agreed to move out of the house within 48 hours and sign over my interest in the property, David would provide a one-time payment of $50,000 and allow me to keep my car, which was fully paid off and already in my name. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue any claims related to the refinancing or other financial matters. It was insulting. He was offering me a fraction of what he'd already taken, in exchange for walking away from my home and my legal rights. I forwarded the document to Mark with a single word: thoughts. His response was equally concise. Desperation. He knows he's in trouble. I closed the document without responding and continued with my preparations. I printed bank statements, gathered what legal documents I could find, and packed an overnight bag, just in case I needed to leave quickly after tomorrow's meeting. Around 3 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. When I answered, I found a delivery person holding an elaborate flower arrangement. Rachel Wilson? Yes, I said, confused. These are for you. He handed me the flowers in a small envelope before heading back to his van. The arrangement was stunning. Orchids, roses, and lilies in a crystal vase that must have cost a small fortune. I opened the envelope, expecting a note from David, perhaps an attempt at reconciliation. Instead, I found a typed message. Enjoy them while you can. You won't be able to afford luxuries like these once we're done with you. There was no signature, but the message was clear. Intimidation. I photographed the flowers and the note, adding them to my documentation file. Then I took the entire arrangement next door to Mrs. Johnson. "These are lovely, Rachel," she said, admiring the flowers. "But why give them to me?" "They're from David, or more likely, Megan." A not-so-subtle threat. I showed her the note. Mrs. Johnson's expression hardened. "Disgusting. Some people have no class." She took the flowers and placed them on her hall table. "I'll enjoy them on your behalf, dear, and I'll keep the note as evidence." When I returned home, I found I had dozens of notifications on my phone. Emails, texts, missed calls. Had David escalated his campaign already? But when I checked, I discovered something unexpected. Every notification was from a different company: subscription services, online retailers, food delivery apps. Each message welcomed me to their service and thanked me for my order. Someone, David or Megan most likely, had used my email address to sign up for dozens of services, many with free trials that would convert to paid subscriptions if not canceled. It was a petty annoyance, designed to overwhelm me with digital clutter and potentially saddle me with unwanted charges. I took screenshots of everything, then methodically went through each notification, canceling subscriptions and reporting the signups as fraudulent. It took over an hour, but I was determined not to let them get away with even this minor harassment. As evening approached, I considered my dinner options. I wasn't eager to be in the kitchen when David and Megan returned from work, but I also refused to hide in the guest room like an unwelcome guest. This was my home, and I would not be intimidated out of its common areas. I decided on a simple pasta dish, something I could prepare quickly, but that would require me to occupy the kitchen for at least half an hour. A small act of resistance, claiming space in what increasingly felt like enemy territory. I was draining the pasta when I heard their cars pull into the driveway, voices outside, then the front door opening. Footsteps in the hall, then silence, as they registered my presence in the kitchen. "What are you doing?" Megan asked, her voice sharp. "Making dinner," I replied without turning around. "There's enough for one if you'd like some, David. I remember how much you enjoyed my pesto." "No, thank you," he said stiffly. "We have dinner reservations." "Suit yourself." I continued preparing my plate, hyper-aware of them standing in the doorway, watching me. "Did you get the flowers?" Megan finally asked, her tone falsely casual. I turned, meeting her gaze directly. "I did. They're lovely. Mrs. Johnson is enjoying them right now." Confusion flickered across her face. "Who?" "Our neighbor. I gave them to her along with your charming note. She's keeping it for me. Evidence, you know." Megan's composure slipped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? The note threatening me? The one that came with the flowers you sent?" I tilted my head, watching her carefully. "Or perhaps you were referring to the dozens of subscriptions you signed me up for this afternoon. Also documented, by the way." David stepped forward, his face tight with anger. "That's enough, Rachel. Stop making accusations." "Oh, I'm just getting started with the accusations," I said calmly. "But I'll save the rest for tomorrow's meeting. I wouldn't want to spoil the surprise." I picked up my plate and moved toward the dining room. As I passed them, Megan grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, "but you have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked pointedly at her hand until she released me. "Actually, Megan, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A woman so insecure that she needs to steal someone else's husband and home to feel validated. It would be sad if it wasn't so pathetic. Her face flushed with anger. "You bit—" "Megan," David interrupted sharply. "Let's go. We're going to be late." I continued to the dining room, my heart racing but my exterior calm. Behind me, I heard them arguing in hushed tones as they gathered their things and left. The front door slammed with unnecessary force. Only when their cars had pulled away did I allow myself to sit, my hands trembling slightly as I set down my plate. The confrontation had been brief but intense, and I knew it was only a prelude to what tomorrow would bring. I ate my dinner in silence, keenly aware of the empty chair across from me. 8 years of shared meals, conversations, laughter, gone in an instant. The house felt cavernous and cold without the warmth of the relationship I'd thought we had. But underneath the sadness, another emotion was growing stronger. Determination. David and Megan had tried to intimidate me with flowers, petty digital harassment, and now direct confrontation. None of it had worked. If anything, their tactics had only strengthened my resolve. Tomorrow, at the meeting with the attorneys, I would show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the woman you're trying to destroy. The morning of the attorney meeting dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I had barely slept, listening for any sound that might indicate David or Megan were trying something new. But the night had passed quietly, with only the occasional creak of the house to disturb the silence. I rose early, showered, and dressed, with care, a charcoal pencil skirt, cream blouse, and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me on my wedding day. Armor of a different sort. My hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, makeup understated but flawless. I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the determined woman staring back at me. The past few days had changed me, fundamentally. David and Megan were already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, engaged in hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when I appeared. David looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. Megan, in contrast, was immaculately put together in a navy suit that probably cost more than a month of my salary at Hillside Coffee. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral as I moved past them to pour myself coffee. David cleared his throat. "Rachel, about yesterday." "Save it for the meeting," I cut him off, taking my coffee to the far end of the counter. "I have nothing to say to either of you until our attorneys are present." "You're being ridiculous," Megan snapped. "This whole lawyer thing is an unnecessary drama. If you'd just accept David's settlement offer, we could all move on with our lives." I sipped my coffee, studying her over the rim of my mug. $50,000 for my half of a house worth over $700,000, plus my share of retirement accounts, joint savings, and 8 years of marriage? That's not a settlement offer, Megan. It's an insult. "It's more than generous considering," she began, but David cut her off with a sharp look. "We'll discuss it at the meeting," he said firmly, gathering his keys and briefcase. 2 o'clock, right?" I nodded, feeling a small flicker of satisfaction at his obvious discomfort. "I'll see you there." They left shortly after, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. Once alone, I allowed myself a moment of relief before texting Jessica to confirm our pre-meeting strategy session at 1:30. "All set," she replied. "Mark has some interesting updates. And don't worry, we're ready for whatever they throw at us." The morning passed in a blur of preparation. I gathered the last of my documentation, made copies of everything, and organized it all in a binder, for easy reference during the meeting. I also took time to call my boss at Hillside Coffee, explaining that I needed to extend my absence for a few more days. Nancy was understanding, as always. "Take all the time you need, Rachel," she said. Warmly, "Your job will be waiting when you're ready to come back. And if you need any help with, well, anything, just ask." The whole team is here for you." Her kindness nearly brought me to tears. In the midst of David's betrayal, it was comforting to be reminded that not everyone in my life was out to hurt me. At noon, I packed my binder and a change of clothes into my car. Regardless of how the meeting went, I wasn't sure I wanted to return to the house immediately afterward. Jessica had offered her guest room if I needed a break from the emotional battlefield my home had become. Before leaving, I walked through each room slowly, taking everything in. The living room where David and I had spent countless evenings watching movies. The kitchen where we'd cooked special meals for birthdays and anniversaries. The backyard patio where we'd hosted summer barbecues with friends. So many memories, now tainted by his duplicity. As I reached the front door, my phone pinged with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar. Andrea, Briggs of First National Bank, com. "Mrs. Wilson," it read. "After our conversation yesterday, I reviewed the documentation for your home refinancing. I feel obligated to inform you that while I did notarize the document, I did not personally witness your signature. Ms. Taylor assured me you had signed it earlier, but were unable to come to the bank in person due to work commitments. I now realize this was inappropriate. I have already spoken with my supervisor about the situation and will be making a formal statement. I apologize for my role in this matter." I stared at the screen, heart racing. Andrea had just handed us the smoking gun, written admission of notary fraud in the refinancing. I forwarded the email to Mark immediately, adding, "Just received this. Game changer?" His response came within minutes. "Absolute game changer. See you at 1:30. With me. Renewed confidence, I drove to Ocean View Law offices, arriving 15 minutes early for our strategy session. The receptionist directed me to the same conference room as before, where Mark and Jessica were already waiting, heads bent over documents spread across the table. "Rachel," Mark said, rising to greet me. "Perfect timing. We just received confirmation from the forensic accountant. She's traced most of the missing funds. David has been less than clever about hiding his financial maneuvers." Jessica pulled out a chair for me. "And that email from Andrea Briggs? It's exactly what we needed. She's basically admitted to falsifying a notarization, which automatically invalidates the refinancing document." "What does that mean for us?" I asked, setting my binder on the table. "It means," Mark said with a satisfied smile, "that we now have incontrovertible evidence of fraud. The refinancing can be contested and likely reversed, especially with Ms. Briggs's testimony. The equity he extracted, he'll have to account for every penny." The next 45 minutes were spent reviewing our strategy. Mark had prepared a comprehensive presentation of the evidence, starting with the forged refinancing documents and proceeding through the systematically diverted funds, the Horizon Projects LLC, and the attempted intimidation tactics. "Our primary goal," he explained, "is to secure a favorable settlement without going to court. The leverage we have is significant. Evidence of forgery, financial misconduct, and an email from a bank employee admitting to improper notarization. David is facing not just an expensive divorce, but potential criminal charges." "And if he doesn't agree to settle?" I asked. "Then we proceed with both divorce filings and criminal complaints," Mark said firmly. "But based on what we know of his character and actions so far, I believe he'll choose self-preservation." Just before 2 o'clock, the receptionist appeared to inform us that David had arrived with his attorney. "They're in conference room B. Would you like me to show them in here?" Mark shook his head. "No, we'll join them there. It's always advantageous to enter on your own terms, rather than wait for the opposition to come to you." With that bit of strategic wisdom, we gathered our materials and followed the receptionist to conference room B. David was seated at the far end of the table, speaking quietly with a thin, sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. Megan sat beside David, looking less confident than she had that morning. All three looked up as we entered. David's expression was guarded, but I noticed a flicker of surprise when he saw Mark, Perhaps he hadn't expected me to secure such high-caliber representation. "Mr. Wilson," Mark said cordially, extending his hand to David's attorney. "And you must be Mr. "Lawrence Phelps," the man replied, shaking Mark's hand briefly. "Representing Mr. Wilson in this matter." We took our seats opposite them, the polished conference table like a battlefield between us. Mark arranged his documents methodically, taking his time. I recognized the tactic, establishing dominance through deliberate calm. "Before we begin," Phelps said, "I'd like to state that my client is interested in an amicable resolution to this unfortunate situation. He has prepared a revised settlement offer that we believe is both fair and generous." He slid a document across the table. Mark picked it up, scanned it briefly, then passed it to me without comment. The new offer was slightly better than the previous one, $75,000 instead of $50,000, plus my car and personal belongings. Still a fraction of what I was entitled to, still requiring me to vacate the house immediately. I placed the document face down on the table and looked directly at David. "No." Phelps raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Wilson, I encourage you to consider this offer carefully. Divorces can be lengthy, expensive proceedings, and there's no guarantee—" "Mr. Phelps," Mark interrupted smoothly, "while we appreciate the offer, it fails to address several significant issues. Most notably, the fraudulent refinancing of the Wilson residence and the subsequent diversion of equity funds." Phelps frowned. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Then allow me to illuminate the situation." Mark opened a folder and extracted a copy of the refinancing document. "This paperwork, submitted to First National Bank last month, bears what purports to be Rachel Wilson's signature. Mrs. Wilson never signed this document, never authorized the refinancing, and was entirely unaware of it until 3 days ago." "That's a serious allegation," Phelps said cautiously. "It is, and one we can prove." Mark slid Andrea Briggs's email across the table. "The notary who verified this supposed signature has already admitted she did not witness Mrs. Wilson sign the document. In fact, she has stated that Ms. Taylor—" He nodded toward Megan, who paled visibly, assured her that Mrs. Wilson had already signed it but couldn't come to the bank in person. David shot a sharp look at Megan, who stared resolutely at the table. "Furthermore," Mark continued, extracting more documents from his folder, "we have evidence that the $175,000 extracted from the home equity was transferred to accounts accessible only to Mr. Wilson, then partially redistributed to Horizon Projects LLC, a company jointly owned by Mr. Wilson and Ms. Taylor." Phelps looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Thompson, these are complex financial matters that would require thorough—" "They're not complex at all, Mr. Phelps. They're quite straightforward." Mark laid out bank statements, transfer records, and the LLC registration documents. "Your client systematically diverted marital assets with the apparent intention of depriving Mrs. Wilson of her legal share. He forged her signature on refinancing documents, or allowed it to be forged on his behalf. And he did all this while engaging in an extramarital affair with his business partner, whom he then moved into the marital home while his wife was away, on a brief family visit." The conference room fell silent. David was staring at the table, jaw clenched. Megan looked like she might be ill. Phelps was rapidly scanning the documents Mark had provided, his expression growing more grave with each page. "In addition," Mark said, his voice deceptively casual, "we have documentation of Mr. Wilson and Ms. Taylor's attempts to intimidate Mrs. Wilson. Anonymous threatening notes, financial harassment, verbal confrontations, all carefully recorded and dated." Phelps cleared his throat, clearly buying time. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Thompson, but allegations require proof, and—" "We have the proof," I interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. "Every document, every transaction, every threat. And we have Andrea Briggs, who's already made a statement to her supervisor about the notary fraud." David finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since the meeting began. "Rachel, this is unnecessary. We can work this out between us, without all this legal maneuvering." "We're well past that, David," I said quietly. "You gave up the right to a friendly negotiation when you moved your girlfriend into our home and tried to steal everything we built together." Phelps leaned over to whisper something to David, who shook his head stubbornly. After a brief, tense exchange, Phelps straightened up. "My client maintains that while some of his actions may have been imprudent, there was no malicious intent. The refinancing was intended to fund renovations that would increase the property value, benefiting both parties. The transferred funds were being held in anticipation of divorce proceedings, not hidden permanently." Mark's smile was cold. "Mr. Phelps, with all due respect, that explanation doesn't account for the forged signature, the fraudulent notarization, or the fact that Mrs. Wilson was kept entirely in the dark about all of it. Nor does it explain the creation of Horizon Projects LLC, or the fact that your client and Ms. Taylor were actively planning to flip the property once Mrs. Wilson had been removed from the picture." "You can't prove that," Megan said suddenly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. Jessica slid another document across the table, an email printout with Megan's name in the sender field. "Actually, we can. This email from you to David, dated 3 months ago, specifically discusses your plans to renovate and flip the house once Rachel's out of the way." "Your words, Ms. Taylor, not ours." Megan's face went from pale to crimson. "Where did you get that? You hacked my email." "It was provided to us by a concerned colleague of yours," Jessica said smoothly. "Someone who felt your actions were ethically questionable." I thought of the anonymous email I'd received, the concerned observer from Megan's design firm. They had come through after all. Phelps requested a brief recess to confer with his client. As they left the room, Mark turned to me with a satisfied nod. "They're rattled. That's exactly where we want them." Jessica squeezed my hand. "You're doing great. Just stay calm and let Mark handle the negotiation." When David and his attorney returned 20 minutes later, Megan was notably absent. David looked defeated, the confident architect replaced by a man who'd just realized how thoroughly he'd miscalculated. "We're prepared to discuss a more equitable settlement," Phelps began, his tone considerably more conciliatory. "Given the circumstances, my client is willing to transfer full ownership of the marital home to Mrs. Wilson, along with restoration of all diverted funds and a fair division of remaining assets." Mark raised an eyebrow. "And the Horizon Projects LLC? It will be dissolved, with all assets returned to the marital estate for division. And Ms. Taylor's involvement?" Phelps cleared his throat. "Ms. Taylor has left the building. Her participation in this matter is concluded." I felt a surge of triumph at that. Megan had abandoned ship at the first sign of real trouble. So, much for their grand partnership. Over the next 2 hours, we hammered out the details of the settlement. In addition to the house, I would receive half of our retirement accounts, compensation for the emotional distress of the situation, and a substantial portion of the diverted funds. David would be responsible for all legal fees and any penalties associated with the fraudulent refinancing. In return, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges related to the forgery. A concession Mark advised was reasonable given the strength of our settlement. The entire agreement was contingent on David moving out of the house immediately and having no contact with me except through our attorneys. As Phelps reviewed the final points with David, I sat back in my chair, emotionally drained but victorious. The home I'd poured my heart into would remain mine. The financial security David had tried to strip away would be restored. And most importantly, I had stood my ground against his betrayal and manipulation. When all parties had signed the preliminary agreement, a formal document would follow once the details were finalized. Phelps and David prepared to leave. David paused at the door, turning back to look at me one last time. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. Things just spiraled. I met his gaze steadily. You made choices, David. Every step of the way. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the truth of my words, then followed his attorney out of the conference room. As the door closed behind them, I let out a long, shaky breath. It was over. Not the legal process, that would take months to fully resolve, but the confrontation, the moment of reckoning I'd been dreading and preparing for since walking into my changed home. Congratulations, Rachel, Mark said warmly. You stood firm. When many would have crumbled, that took real courage. Jessica was beaming. I told you he'd cave once he realized what he was up against. Men like David always do. They talk big but fold when actually challenged. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. What happens now? Now, Mark said, gathering his documents. We formalize everything. David has agreed to vacate the property by tomorrow evening. We'll have the locks changed immediately afterward. A forensic accountant will trace and recover the diverted funds. And you, Rachel, can begin rebuilding your life on your own terms. As we left the conference room, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering anger, and underneath it all, a quiet sadness for what had been lost. Not just my marriage, but my trust in the man I had loved for 8 years. Are you all right? Jessica asked as we walked to the elevator. You look a million miles away. I'm processing, I admitted. It's a lot to take in. That's understandable. Would you like to stay with me tonight, or are you ready to go back to the house? I considered the question carefully. Going home meant facing the empty spaces where David's things had been, sleeping alone in a house designed for two. But it also meant reclaiming my territory, beginning the process of making it fully mine again. I think I need to go home, I decided. But would you mind coming with me? Just to check that everything's secure? Of course, Jessica said immediately. I'll even stay over if you want company. Girls' night in with terrible movies and excellent wine. The offer was tempting, but I shook my head. Thanks, but I think I need some time alone. Just knowing you're available if I need you is enough. We parted ways in the parking garage, agreeing to meet at my house in an hour. As I drove home, I took the scenic route along the harbor, windows down, letting the salt air clear my head. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe fully. When I arrived home, the house was quiet and empty. David's car was gone from the driveway, as was Megan's BMW. In the kitchen, I found a note on the counter in David's handwriting, taking essential items tonight. We'll arrange for the rest to be moved tomorrow. Key on the hook when I leave. It was surreal, this civil end to what had been a chaotic, painful few days. No dramatic showdown, no final confrontation, just a note and a promise to be gone by tomorrow. I wandered through the house, noting what was already missing. David's laptop from the office desk, his favorite whiskey glasses from the bar cabinet, the vintage record player he'd inherited from his grandfather. Small pieces of his life already being extracted from the fabric of ours. In the master bedroom, signs of hasty packing were evident. Drawers left partially open, empty hangers in the closet where his best suits had hung. Megan's belongings were gone entirely, as if she'd never been there at all. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, now my bed, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the loss of David, who had revealed himself to be someone I never truly knew, but for the death of the future I had believed in. The children we'd talked about having. The retirement we'd planned together. The lifetime of shared moments that would never come to pass. The tears were cleansing, washing away the last of my hesitation and doubt. By the time Jessica arrived, I had composed myself and was making a list of immediate changes I wanted to make to the house. New paint in the bedroom, different furniture arrangement in the living room, Perhaps a complete renovation of the kitchen, which had always been too dark for my taste. "You look better," Jessica observed as I let her in. "More like yourself." "I feel better," I admitted. "Lighter. Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying." We did a walkthrough of the house together, making sure all windows and doors were secure, checking that nothing of value had been taken beyond David's personal belongings. Everything seemed in order. "He's really gone," Jessica said, a note of wonder in her voice. "Just like that." "Just like that," I echoed. "It's strange, isn't it? How something that took 8 years to build can fall apart in days." "Are you having regrets?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I'm sad for what I've lost, but I don't regret standing up for myself. David made his choices. I made mine. And in the end, I think I made the better ones." Jessica hugged me tightly. "You absolutely did. And you're going to be just fine, Rachel Wilson. Better than fine." After she left, promising to check in first thing tomorrow, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled on the back patio. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard David and I had landscaped together 3 summers ago. I had always loved this time of day, when the world softened and slowed, making space for reflection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, changing. The Locks beginning the formal divorce process, figuring out how to live alone after 8 years of partnership. But tonight, in this moment of quiet triumph, I allowed myself to simply be still, to acknowledge how far I'd come in just a few days. I had walked into my home to find my husband and his girlfriend had taken over, believing I would meekly surrender everything I'd worked for. Instead, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed, allies I hadn't realized I had, and a future that, while different from what I'd planned, held promise and possibility. The house was quiet around me, no longer hostile territory but a sanctuary, a place that was truly mine. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt not just resigned or determined, but genuinely hopeful about what came next. 6 weeks had passed since the day I won back my house. The morning after our decisive meeting, a locksmith had arrived promptly at 9 to change every lock, security code, and garage door opener. I had watched with quiet satisfaction as the last physical traces of David's access to my home were systematically removed. The locksmith, a burly man with kind eyes, had handed me the new keys with a wink and said, "Fresh start, ma'am." He had no idea how right he was. David had kept his word, retrieving the last of his belongings while I was out having lunch with Jessica. When I returned, the house felt different, lighter somehow, despite the empty spaces where his things had been. His golf clubs no longer cluttered the garage corner. His collection of architectural magazines was gone from the built-in shelves. The leather recliner he'd insisted on buying despite my objections had vanished from the living room, leaving a conspicuous void that felt more like an opportunity than a loss. That evening, Mrs. Johnson had come over with homemade lasagna and a bottle of good red wine. "For your first official night of freedom," she had said, her eyes twinkling behind rimless glasses. We had sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, talking about everything and nothing. When she left, she had hugged me tightly and whispered, "He never deserved you, dear. Remember that." Now, 6 weeks. Later, the initial shock had faded, replaced by a steady determination to rebuild. The formal divorce proceedings were underway, handled efficiently by Mark Thompson. David had remained surprisingly cooperative, perhaps realizing that further resistance would only worsen his position. The forensic accountant had traced most of the diverted funds, which were gradually being restored to accounts in my name. I stood in the center of what had once been our bedroom, surveying the transformation. The walls, formerly a muted beige, that David had chosen, now glowed a soft sage green. The heavy wooden furniture had been replaced with lighter pieces in pale oak. New bedding, new curtains, new artwork, all reflecting my tastes, not compromises reached after lengthy negotiations with a partner. My phone chimed with a text from Olivia. "Video call in 10? Want to see the bedroom makeover?" I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. My sister had been my rock throughout this process, offering unwavering support despite the geographical distance between us. Every major decision, every small victory, had been shared with her. While waiting for her call, I wandered through the house, still marveling at how different it felt now that it was truly mine. The dining room had been converted into a home office, with a sleek desk positioned to capture the morning light. The spare bedroom that had once housed David's exercise equipment was now a cozy reading nook, walls lined with bookshelves, a plush armchair nestled in the corner. These changes weren't just cosmetic, they were declarations of independence, physical manifestations of my reclaimed agency. Each decision made solely on my preferences, each room reshaped to serve my needs and desires, was an act of self-reclamation. My phone rang, Olivia's smiling face appearing on the screen. "Show me the green room," she demanded by way of greeting. I laughed, flipping the camera to give her a virtual tour of the transformed bedroom. "What do you think? Too much?" "It's perfect," she declared. "Exactly what you described. How does it feel sleeping in there now?" "Peaceful," I admitted. I thought it would be harder, that I'd still feel his presence somehow. But it's like the house has exhaled all the tension and negativity. It feels completely different. "That's because you're completely different," Olivia said wisely. "The Rachel from 2 months ago wouldn't have recognized the woman you are now." Her observation gave me pause. Was that true? Had I changed so fundamentally in such a short time? I considered the question as I continued showing her the other changes I'd made to the house. "You might be right," I said finally. "I feel different. Stronger, certainly. More confident in my decisions. Less willing to compromise on things that matter to me." "All good things," Olivia noted. "Though I'm still mad at David for putting you through this. I have to admit, the woman who emerged from this nightmare is pretty spectacular." After our call ended, I sat in my new reading nook, contemplating Olivia's words. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless. There had been nights when I'd cried myself to sleep, mornings when I'd awakened feeling lost and alone. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars that were still tender to the touch. But alongside the pain, something unexpected had blossomed, a profound appreciation for my own resilience. I had faced one of my worst fears, being abandoned and manipulated by the person I trusted most. And I had not only survived, but prevailed. My phone chimed again, this time with an email notification. The sender was Andrea Briggs, the bank employee whose confession had provided crucial leverage in our negotiations with David. "Dear Mrs. Wilson," she wrote, "I wanted to let you know that I've accepted a position at another financial institution. Before leaving First National, I completed all necessary documentation regarding the irregularities in your refinancing case. Your attorney should have everything needed to fully resolve the situation. I also wanted to apologize again for my role in what happened. It was a serious lapse in judgment that I deeply regret. I wish you all the best moving forward." I forwarded the email to Mark, adding a brief note of my own. "Closure on another front. How are we progressing with the refinancing reversal?" His response came within minutes. "Final paperwork should be ready for your signature next week. The bank has been surprisingly accommodating, likely motivated by their desire to avoid any hint of scandal. Once completed, the house will be solely in your name, free from the additional debt David attempted to saddle it with." I set the phone down, feeling another small weight lift from my shoulders. One by one, the loose ends were being tied up, the damage repaired, the path forward cleared. Of obstacles, a knock at the front door interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Sam Cooper from across the street, holding what appeared to be a small plant. "Housewarming gift," she announced when I opened the door, thrusting the potted herb toward me. "It's rosemary, for remembrance, and also for really good roast chicken." I laughed, inviting her in. "It's not exactly a new house, Sam." "No, but it's a new beginning," she countered, following me to the kitchen. "Kate and I have been watching the transformation from afar. New paint, new furniture being delivered. It's like one of those home makeover shows, only with a significantly better backstory." I placed the rosemary on the windowsill, where it would catch the afternoon sun. "Speaking of stories, have you heard anything about David and Megan?" Sam hesitated, clearly weighing whether to share whatever gossip she'd collected. "You sure you want to know?" "I'm curious, not heartbroken," I assured her. "Whatever they're doing, it can't affect me now." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Well, according to Mike at the architectural firm, you remember him, came to your Christmas party last year? David and Megan had some kind of massive falling out after your lawyer meeting. Apparently, she blamed him for not covering their tracks better, and he accused her of making the situation worse with the flowers and threatening note." I couldn't help but smile at that, the two conspirators turning on each other when their plan collapsed. "And where are they now?" "David took a position with a firm in Seattle. Bit of a career step down from what I hear." "And Megan?" Sam's expression turned gleeful. "She's dating her divorce attorney's son. Started about 2 weeks after everything. Went down with you and David." The information washed over me without triggering the pain I might have expected even a month ago. David's life, Megan's choices, they were narratives that no longer intersected with mine in any meaningful way. "Good for them," I said, meaning it. "I hope they find whatever they're looking for." Sam studied me with open admiration. "You're handling this with remarkable grace, Rachel. If it had been me, if it had been you, you would have handled it exactly as I did," I countered. "You do what you need to do when you're fighting for your life and home." After Sam left, promising to invite me to their next backyard barbecue, I returned to my reading nook with a cup of tea. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting warm patches across the hardwood floors. The house was quiet, not the tense, uncomfortable quiet of those days with David and Megan, but a peaceful silence that felt like a soft blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I picked up the journal I'd started keeping since that fateful day, flipping through entries that chronicled my journey from shocked victim to determined advocate to peaceful victor. The early pages were filled with raw anger and pain, sentences punctuated with questions I thought might never be answered. Why would he do this? How could I not have seen it coming? What's wrong with me that he would choose her? As the weeks progressed, the tone shifted. Plans replaced recriminations. Decisions superseded doubts. The questions changed from why to how to restructure my finances, how to redesign the living room, how to build a life that was wholly mine. I turned to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Today marked exactly 2 months since I had returned from Olivia's to find strangers in my kitchen. 2 months that had felt like both an eternity and an eye blink. "I went to Hillside Coffee today," I wrote, "and told Nancy I'm ready to return to work next week. She offered me a promotion, assistant manager to full manager, with a significant pay increase. Said she'd been planning to approach me about it before everything happened, but decided to wait until I was ready. I start Monday. The house renovations are nearly complete, just the backyard left to tackle, but that feels like a project for spring rather than something to rush through now. The garden beds David never had time to help me build will be my first priority when the weather warms. I'm thinking vegetables and cutting flowers. Practical and beautiful. The combination I always wanted. Mark called this morning with news about the divorce proceedings. David has agreed to all terms without further negotiation. The financial restoration is nearly complete. In exchange for not pursuing criminal charges related to the forgery, he's conceded everything else: retirement accounts, investments, even his portion of our tax refund from last year. Mark says, "The paperwork should be finalized within 2 months. By Christmas, I'll legally be Rachel Wilson, single woman and sole owner of this house." The strangest part in all of this is how rarely I think about David now. He occupied so much space in my life for 8 years, and now he's just gone. Not physically, his clothes, his possessions, his presence, but emotionally. The anger has faded. The hurt has dulled. What remains is a calm certainty that whatever comes next will be better because it will be authentic, chosen by me alone. Olivia says I'm different now, stronger, more decisive, less willing to compromise on things that matter. She's right. Of course. The woman who walked into this house 2 months ago and found strangers in her kitchen no longer exists. In her place stands someone who knows her own worth, who trusts her own judgment, who refuses to be diminished or displaced. I lost a husband, but I found myself. And in the final accounting, that makes me the winner in ways David and Megan could never understand. I closed the journal, setting it aside as the evening shadows lengthened across the room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to exercise my reclaimed agency. But tonight, in this peaceful house that was finally truly mine, I allowed myself to simply be present in the moment of completion. The phone rang, interrupting my reverie. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Rachel? It's Chris Parker, David's friend." I tensed slightly, wondering why he would be calling after all this time. "Hello, Chris? I hope I'm not bothering you," he said, sounding uncertain. I wanted to check how you're doing, and to apologize again for not warning you sooner about what David was planning." "I'm doing well," I said, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant it. "And you have nothing to apologize for. You did warn me, when it counted." There was a pause then, I'm glad. "David told everyone you went crazy, that you threatened him and Megan, that your lawyer manufactured evidence. But I didn't believe it. It didn't sound like you." A small, humorless laugh escaped me. "That certainly sounds like David. Always. The victim, never the villain." "He moved to Seattle," Chris offered. "Got a job with a smaller firm there. Megan didn't go with him." "So I heard." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm still in Ashwood. Started my own consulting business last month. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I remember you mentioned you were working at that coffee shop on Pine Street. I was wondering if I could take you to lunch sometime. Not as a date," he added hastily. "Just as friends, to catch up." The invitation caught me off guard. Chris had always been David's friend, part of a social circle I'd assumed would evaporate along with my marriage. That he would reach out independently, offering friendship without David as the connecting thread, was unexpected. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself again. "I'm starting back at Hillside next week, as the new manager actually, but I could do lunch on Wednesday." We made arrangements to meet at a small bistro near the coffee shop, the conversation easy and uncomplicated. When we hung up, I found myself smiling. Not because I had any romantic interest in Chris, but because his call represented yet another way my life was expanding beyond the narrow confines David had tried to impose. New. Job, new friends, new possibilities. All because I had refused to be pushed out of my own home, refused to accept the narrative David and Megan had scripted for me. I moved to the back patio as twilight descended, wrapping a soft throw around my shoulders against the evening chill. The yard was shadowy now, the flower beds dormant, waiting for spring's renewal. I could already envision how it would look in 6 months, vibrant with color, abundant with life, transformed by my own hands into a sanctuary that reflected my tastes and priorities, just like the house, just like my life. The sky darkened, stars emerging one by one in the velvet expanse above. I remained on the patio, content in the solitude, anchored in the present moment while looking forward to the future with a quiet, steady confidence. 2 months ago, I had stood on this same patio, devastated by betrayal, uncertain of my next steps, afraid of what the future might hold. Tonight, I sat here transformed, not by magic or miracle, but by my own courage, determination, and resilience. David had moved his new girlfriend into our home, declaring, "We're taking over now," with arrogant certainty that I would surrender without a fight. Instead, I had made one call that set in motion a series of events he never anticipated, revealing a strength within myself I hadn't known existed. The house was quiet around me, peaceful in a way it had never been during my marriage. My home, my sanctuary, my victory. And as the night deepened, stars multiplying across the darkened sky, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, challenges or opportunities, setbacks or triumphs, I would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought me through the darkest chapter of my life into this moment of hard-won peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.